From Music City, USA, it's David Hooper and Music Business Radio.
From the TuneIn Broadcasting Studios in Nashville, Tennessee, this is Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm your host, David Hooper. With me today, engineer, mixer Craig Alvin. He's worked with artists like Amy Grant, Erin McCarley, Bronze Radio Return, Gunger, Hanson. Craig, welcome to Music Business Radio.
Thanks.
We've had a lot of great stories about how people came upon the music business, but you've got one that we haven't heard yet. Originally, you went to seminary. Yes.
Well, before that, I grew up, my dad's a gospel singer, and he has a quartet that is still going. They started the year I was born, and he's still doing it.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about quartets. Like you go to the Christian quartet show or the gospel music convention, those guys go forever.
Oh, I know.
So sometimes the quartets outlast the guys because they just keep putting new members in there.
Yeah, well, this they just put the original lineup back together, and they sound fantastic. Last time I was home, I went out and saw them sing, and it was fantastic. They sound better than they ever have.
So you had exposure to the music business?
Yes.
So it's not safe to say you went just straight from seminary to the music business, but you kind of took the seminary detour.
Yeah, actually, before I went to seminary, I actually was a music theory major at Mount Hood Community College out in Gresham, Oregon. And then when I finished up with music there, I decided to go to Bible college for a while. And, I learned a lot, but it didn't work out.
Let me ask you about the music theory major.
Sure.
When you're in the studio working with acts, you obviously know a lot of music theory. Do you find the artists that you work with, do they know that as well, or are they coming in there and just performing and writing?
Well, it depends. There are certainly people who just play by ear and have learned their way around music that way. If I'm doing a session, recording session here in town, and we're over in Berry Hill or whatever, generally the session musicians know their theory really well.
Another parallel of that, which we're going to talk about as we get deeper into the show, this is a funny quote that we were talking just before the show about. You said, I really don't know about the music business, but here you are on Music Business Radio, and you built a business. So let's dive deep into that. You weren't always here in Nashville. You came here from Portland, Oregon.
Yes.
And you started the business there?
I started a recording studio there that it went fairly well. I'm actually not the greatest with the business side. I tend to keep my head in the music. And, there's a certain technical element to audio engineering that I have to stay focused on too. But I don't know. I have people that do the business for me, the business side, negotiations and, making sure I get paid and all that. So I'm really not the best with that. I don't know anything about, people talk to me about their pub deals or royalties or whatever.
What's a pub deal?
Clueless. I am clueless when it comes to that.
Well, I think there are a lot of people listening that can relate to that. Mm-hmm. They're the creative types, so people just like you. So let's talk about how you can become successful in the music business as a creative type. What was that first studio like? And did you have somebody who handled the business for you?
Yeah, I had a business partner, a guy named Rich Hogan. He had built the studio, and he was really good with things like building stuff. He built all the cabinet work in there and built the place from the ground up, and it was a great room. I loved working in it, but he was always focused on the studio side, where I was always focused on the artist side, like trying to find artists that I wanted to work with and figuring out how their records should sound and getting those records done. And that's what I did. So he handled a lot of the, billing and stuff like that, and I handled the rest.
Give some advice for business people. Nashville's a town full of business people.
Yeah.
In communicating with creative people, how can't we all just get along? How can these two people communicate with each other?
Yeah, well, I think that from my standpoint, I have to be able to listen to the business folks and be sensitive to what they want. Otherwise, I'm not going to work with them again. If they have a particular idea that they have for the record, a way that they want something, I've really got to do my best to try and give them what they want. But then the other side of that is I don't want to be cheesed out by it. I want to be able to enjoy what I'm doing and feel like I'm doing a good job for the artist too. So I find myself, kind of stuck in the middle a lot of the time.
Yeah, you're like middle management there. Hearing it from the front lines and also the upper guys. I imagine you're pretty good at communicating and hearing both sides and coming up with a agreeable thing.
You have to be. What I do for a living is really strange because, first of all, if somebody doesn't write a song, then I don't get to go to work. And that person is an artist. Then somebody, maybe the songwriter, maybe not, someone comes in and performs that song. And actually several people do. You have an entire band, and you have a producer who's also an artist who's working on arrangement and giving, vision for the whole thing. And really, I'm kind of the guy who just twists knobs and pushes buttons. But I have to be able to do that in a way that best captures the song and makes it feel right, for whatever purpose the song is being recorded for. There's a context that it should land in. It should feel like it's coming from a certain place. It should have a certain emotional weight to it. I have to know which buttons to push to do that. And there's no one particular button that you push to make something sound like a pop song versus a country song. So what I have to do is just through my experience of knowing how all the stuff in the studio works is build that up and try and do what I do, which is also art, but it's also technical. And I have to try and make the producer happy and the artist happy and the A&R guy happy and the program directors happy. All the way down the list, these people, they're all looking for something, and it's intangible. But you know it when you hear it.
You're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. And with me today, engineer mixer Craig Alvin. He's worked with a lot of great people, including Phillips, Craig, and Dean, Amy Grant, Hanson, and For Him. You know it when you hear it. I agree, but people, do they think they can describe it, or do they expect you to kind of reach into their mind and read it?
That is a great question. One of the things that I always tell people when we're working is, don't be afraid to explain things to me in musical terms or emotional terms. Like, if you want the snare to sound less fluffy, then tell me you want it to sound less fluffy, and I'll probably know what you mean. But if you try and talk to me like in engineering terms, if you come in and go, oh, what ratio are you using on the compressor? Is that a 4-to-1? Should it be a 2-to-1? What are you doing with 500 hertz? Those things don't mean anything to me because I don't think of them that way.
Is that how most engineers are? Because, to give a little background, the history of recording engineers, the reason we call them recording engineers, because these were the guys in the white lab coats. Yes. They would build their own boards. They're in there with the soldering gun, and they were really those kind of people. But today, have things changed, or are they still kind of the technical propeller heads?
I think there's a spectrum of guys. Like, I know engineers who are really good at building gear and really think a lot about. They're the kind of guys that they have their tape deck and they've got their oscillator and their oscilloscope, and they are tweaking it to get absolute best performance, lowest distortion, low noise floor, and we need those guys. And I have been that guy to a certain extent. When I have to be that guy, I can do it. But I've found that I had to get my head out of the wires and into the music and start feeling things rather than measuring things.
So I want to take it back to when you first started your own company. You were first starting to engineer and mix, and you've got to deal with all these personalities, we'll say. And I would imagine that would be intimidating. Did you just learn as you went? How did that actually happen to where you got where you are now?
I've always been a reader, and I'm the kind of person that doesn't read novels. I tend to read for information. I was growing up in Portland, and I would go down to Powell's, and Powell's had, most people have heard of Powell's books.
Yeah, huge bookstore.
Yeah, but when I was young, there was another one down the block, which was Powell's Technical Bookstore, and it was giant too. And I would go spend hours down there just reading, like, everything I could find about music engineering and electronics or whatever I felt was, going to help me become better at this. And then I also, about that same time, I met Larry Crane, who owns and is the editor of Tape Op magazine, which is a recording arts magazine.
It's kind of like the lo-fi version of mix. Is that safe to say?
I wouldn't know that I would say it's lo-fi. I think that what they did was they made it okay to talk about all levels of recording. Like, their whole thing was, man, if you got $1 million studio, great, get in it. But if you got a cassette 4-track, great, do it. They weren't trying to be a champion of things that sound bad. They were just trying to be a champion of recording as creative expression. So, yeah, I met Larry, and he and I became really good friends. We helped each other build studios, and there were several engineers that came along and helped me out a lot. Dean Baskerville. I did some records early on with Joe Ciccarelli, and just learned a lot from these people. And I assisted a lot, too.
And when you say build studio, explain that process. We talking the soldering iron and building the electronics, and also the wood part and the glass and the whole physical structure? Or just
we had to do all of that because there weren't a lot of studios in Portland at the time. And we had these tape decks and consoles and microphones and racks full of gear, and Pro Tools wasn't even a thing yet. I think at the time it may have been a 2-track editor. So we had to go in and figure out how to acquire this equipment, how to do maintenance on it, how to, basically my first tape deck was actually 2 tape decks that I bought, and I tore them down in my living room and took the best parts and rebuilt them into one solid tape deck.
Tell me if I'm just making this up. You seem like a guy who isn't afraid to get in, get his hands dirty, make mistakes from the technical side, from the mechanical side. Do you approach mixing and when you're creating a song in the studio the same way?
I have been technical in the past. I don't like to do it now. It's like I like cars, and I have some old cars, and I think they're really fun to drive, but I don't want to work on them. I have people that will do that, and I can do basic things, but that isn't where I find joy. What I like doing is when I sit down to mix, I don't approach it from that technical standpoint. What I do is I try and find a sound that makes the whole song gel together and that features the artist, that makes them sound legit.
You're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper. Craig Alvin is with me today. He's worked with Amy Grant, Phillips, Craig, and Dean. Bronze Radio Return, among others. When we come back, we're going to find out what brought Craig from Portland, Oregon to Nashville. He brought a lot of music. We're going to get some stories. That's next on Music Business Radio.
I love you when you're singing that song, and I got a lump in my throat 'cause you're gonna sing the words wrong.
Hi, this is Vance Joy, and you're listening to Music Business Radio.
On Tap, Lightning 100's free monthly concert series continues at Tin Roof, Nashville, Thursday, May 15th. Enjoy great deals on great grub. This ain't no bar food. On Tap for May features performances by the Lower Lakes. Scott Reevy.
Oh, I'm calling out your name. Won't you hear this poor man's cry? Hear me as I pray.
And more, all for free. The On Tap concert series, Thursday night, May 15th, 8 o'clock sharp. On Tap is brought to you by Tin Roof Nashville and Nashville's independent radio, Lightning 100.
Put the gun down, put the gun down. I'm set fire to the whole damn house. Put it down, put it down, put it down, put it down. Whoa,
Hey, it's ZZ Ward, and you're listening to Music Business Radio.
From Nashville, Tennessee, it's Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper, your host, and with me today, Craig Alvin. He's an engineer mixer based in Nashville. He's worked with Amy Grant, Phillips, Craig, and Dean, Hanson, Casting Crowns, and others. Before we left for the break, Craig, you were talking about getting a sound and having everything gel together. And I know you brought some examples. I'd love you to talk more about that concept and maybe even play something for us.
Sure. I think the first song I'll show you, it's an artist who recently moved to Nashville, and his name is Ren, R-E-N-N. He is a songwriter that reminds me in a lot of ways of some of the songwriters from the late 60s, early 70s. When I heard his voice and what he was writing about, it reminded me of like Townes Van Sant, Glenn Campbell, maybe John Prine. I thought he was writing some really heartfelt music, and it was coming from a real place, something that he was actually going through. When we sat down to record it, we had a band, and we cut everything live on the floor, the vocals, all of it was cut together, and everyone just kind of dove in and started playing, like really playing out and going for it. And it didn't work. I mean, it sounded terrible. And we had to basically put the brakes on and go out and explain to the band, guys, this isn't a competition here. We're not trying to play over anyone else. In fact, what I ended up doing was I said, guys, you got to all turn up the vocals in your headphones and give me maybe 20% less intensity than what the vocalist is giving me.
When you're doing headphones, when you're in a recording session, is it common for the drummer has his drums the loudest, guitarist has his guitar the loudest?
Yeah, I mean, they have control over their own headphone mix to a certain extent. And a lot of guys will just kind of play the chart, and they'll be listening to the vocal, but not much. And I really felt like with this, it was important that they pull back and they think more about how those records sounded, like back when that style of singing and writing was popular. There's a reason why those records sound that way, and it's not because they didn't know how to do it other ways. All kinds of other records were coming out at the time. But they did that because that style of playing and recording just framed the vocals so perfectly. It connected to it. There was emotion, and it supported the lyric.
I love it. You're talking about a frame. Literally, if you think of a picture frame, what does that do? It frames the picture.
Yeah.
It frames the most important part, perhaps.
And there's a subject, in the picture, and that should be what your eye is drawn to.
Well, let's take a sample. You mentioned Ren. Can we play some Ren?
Well, this record isn't out yet, so if you're looking for it, you're probably not going to find it at the time you hear this. But
it's an exclusive.
It'll be coming out sometime in the next year. Here's Ren with Heartache and a Song.
Every man needs a hammer or a mountain to climb, a damsel to rescue in the nick of time. I know now the answer was buried all along, and all I have is heartache and a song. See, I once loved a woman, and she shined bright like the sun. I never knew how truly I could love someone. And then one day she figured it was time to move along. Now all I have is heartache and a song. Well, my song, it goes on just like the ocean. And it might come some days, but it never really dies. All I try to say remains unspoken, and the melody keeps waiting for a tides. You were stuck inside the summer, the heat it beat down strong, the sweat upon my brow I've known my whole life long. You'd think after all my toil I'd still hold her in my arms, but all I have is heartache and a song. Yeah, my song, it goes on just like the ocean, and it might come some days, but it never really dies. And all I try to say remains unspoken, I try to save her heart and hold it to my own. I thought I had the answers, and she went and proved me wrong. Now all I have is heartache and a song. Yeah, my soul, it goes on just like the ocean. It might come some days, but it'll never really die. And all I try to say remains unspoken, and the melody keeps waiting for the tides. Yeah, my soul, it goes on just like the ocean. It might come some days, but it never really dies. All I try to say remains unspoken, and the melody keeps waiting for the tides.
That was Ren, Heartache and a Song on Music Business Radio. I really felt the drummer holding back there.
Yeah.
I know a lot of drummers, and very few of them play that quietly. But it worked because it accentuated the vocal. And you mentioned Glenn Campbell, Wichita lineman.
Yes.
And when you listen to that song, it's like you feel like the guy really is a lineman in Wichita.
Exactly, and that's the thing is when you're trying to take something that's technical like what I do, where I'm thinking about microphones and mic placement, gain staging, and all of the boring stuff that goes into doing this. All of that does have an emotional impact at the end, and you have to make conscious choices at the beginning how you're going to set this up and what kind of acoustics does the room have, what kind of microphones will you choose? Will you choose a condenser mic or a ribbon mic? What style mic pre's? Are you going to use compression or not? All of those things add up to a sound in the end, and that's kind of where the art of it takes over. And that's the part I enjoy, is capturing something that when you hear the finished product, it sounds like it came from a time and a place.
We talked earlier about what a great communicator you've got to be. You've got the upper management label people, and you've got the artist frontline people, and you've got to get everybody working on the same page. I'd love to know more about how you communicate with a band, some of whom you might not have ever met when they come into the studio. Drummer loves to play loud. How do you get those guys all playing together? And quiet down, let's put the vocal out front. Any tips for that? This might be good for anybody who's married. This is great stuff. It applies more than just the music business.
Honestly, I find that one of the best ways of doing it is just by not saying much. I withhold a lot of information, and I only use the talkback mic when it's vitally important. And then also, when I do get on the talkback mic, a lot of times I'll say something that's really inappropriate or rude, just to be funny. And what I find is that kind of does two things. I mean, sometimes that'll backfire on you, but if you know how to time it right, it sets people at ease. And then I'm able to talk to them a little more, openly.
How do you set people at ease? I'd love to know that. I mean, even here on Music Business Radio, we have the same thing. You come in, whenever you're recording somebody, a lot of times people get nervous. And I would imagine, especially when you're with a bunch of other musicians and you don't want to be the guy to mess up, but you want them to play their heart out. Talk about setting the mood in the studio and what people can do when they're in the studio.
For the most part, I usually see that as the producer's job, and I tend to work with really great producers like Gabriel Wilson out in California or Marshall Altman here in Nashville. They are really great at kind of ruling the studio floor. They know how to make people want to please them. And so I like working with those guys because I don't have to do much. I just do my job, and they are the ones dealing with that. But when it does fall to me, you just make sure they feel like they're taken care of. Doing nice things for people, like before the first take, making sure that they have water, that their headphone mix is great. That's really the biggest thing for me, is making sure that headphone mixes sound like they're playing a real record. because if it doesn't sound like a real record, they're going to play different, and they're going to try and compensate for the bad sound. And you don't want them doing that. You want them playing into a great sound, not compensating for a poor sound.
You mentioned, we talked about Glenn Campbell and some of the late 60s series of records that were coming out. And when I think of that period of time in music, I think about regionality. You had Philadelphia, Memphis, Shoals, Los Angeles, New York, Nashville. Did you see that when you moved to Nashville from Portland? Do we make records here in Nashville differently?
Oh, yes. Things are very different. The West Coast style of making records, it differs greatly. What we would do when I lived in Portland and we were going to make a record is we would spend a lot of time talking about the studio, like which studio are we going to go to? And then what you do is you go in and you set up in a studio and you camp out for a week, and we work long days on the music and the arrangements, and do take after take and try different things and all that. Where in Nashville, usually what happens is they'll tell me, okay, be at this studio on this day, and we have a downbeat at 10 o'clock. And we'll cut 5 or 6 songs that day, and then the next day we'll show up and cut another 5 or 6 songs, and then we go home. And that's how we make a record.
2-day record.
2-day record.
And how long
I've
is
done
the day?
1-day records here. So.
And a day is how long?
Usually around 10 hours.
Does that say something about the quality of musicians that we have here, that they can get it done that quick? Or is
it
a budget
absolutely
thing?
does. But I think if you were to take a lot of those musicians aside and ask them which way they would prefer to make a record, I think that they would really like to be able to get into the camp-out feel of going to a studio and hanging out and really going for tones that are going to be featured on the record.
Well, we talked about comfort. I would imagine knowing you've got all week. That's a double-edged sword. Maybe you the work expands to the time, but at the same time, I imagine it's a very comfortable environment for a creative person to do their best work.
Yeah, sure. Let me say, I don't think that either way of making a record is right or wrong. I love making records here in Nashville, and I love the people, the guys that can go in and do that and knock out 5 or 6 songs in a day, and they're just reading the chart and doing something great. That is something that I only have respect for.
And I wish I could do that.
Me too.
Be making records all day.
But, I mean, it's just a different thing. It's a different style of working. And I think that there's really valid examples of, working both ways. And then there's also a downside, working either way.
You're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper, and with me today, engineer, mixer Craig Alvin. He's worked with Amy Grant, Phillips Craig and Dean, Erin McCarley, Bronze Radio Return, among others. And when we come back, we're going to talk about being in the studio, right versus safe decisions. Which one should you go for? That's next on Music Business Radio.
Hey, this is Emerson Hart from Tonic, and you're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the biz.
NS2 and Mercy Lounge are proud to present these upcoming shows. Monday, May 5th at Mercy Lounge, it's the Dandy Warhols. Tuesday, May 6th at Cannery Ballroom, it's Band of Skulls.
Don't have time to waste, 'cause where we are going is anyone's game.
And Friday, May 9th at Mercy Lounge, don't miss Tokyo Police Club.
I didn't need the money, but the money was nice. I need a countdown when the fire is high. Sitting on the curb and it's hot tonight.
Monday, May 5th at Mercy Lounge, the Dandy Warhols. Tuesday, May 6th, Band of Skulls at Cannery Ballroom. And Friday, May 9th at Mercy Lounge, it's Tokyo Police Club. Tickets for all of these shows are available now at mercylounge.com.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters. You're listening to Music Business Radio.
From Nashville, Tennessee, it's Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm David Hooper, your host, and Craig Alvin is with me today. He's worked with Amy Grant, Hanson, Bronze Radio Return, among others. Craig, you said something to me that I really, really loved. You called it right versus safe decisions.
Yeah.
I know there's a tendency for an artist he's had hits in the past, or an executive who's sold a lot of records in the past, to want to go with what works. Sometimes that's not always the right thing.
No, I think when it gets right down to it, nobody has ever said, oh, hey, did you hear the new such and such album? It is so safe. I loved it. People don't do that. I think that generally fear makes really bad art. And if you're going to do something and make a statement and get noticed, you're going to have to take a chance. You can take your, chances in several different ways. What I like to do is I like to throw things slightly off balance or mess things up in creative ways. And that's what I like to do. And it doesn't always go over well, but at least I'm trying to do something and push people's buttons.
I love that term, throwing off balance. I think of a stand-up comic where he's going right, he's going left, and you don't know where he's going, and then at the very end, he resolves it. We certainly do that with a chorus when you hit that tonic note at the end, like, okay, yeah, it's resolved itself. But I feel like you're talking about something more when it comes musically. Can you give some examples, maybe even have something to play for us?
Yeah. I know a good one. There's a guy, he used to live here in town named Peter Barbie, and he has a band called Among Savages. And I mixed his record, and they had done all these beautiful string arrangements. And, they sound gorgeous. The first song on the record, which is called Start at the Beginning, the strings come in, and it's this long intro. And at the time, I was really obsessed with horror movie soundtracks like Bollywood, specifically Bollywood horror movie soundtracks.
It's a very interesting genre.
Yes. They are the strangest sounding things, but I love how they sound. And I just got this idea that what if I took these strings and make them sound like, for the first part of the song, like they're from one of these Bollywood horror movie soundtracks. So for the intro and kind of halfway through the first verse, they're just these creepy, weird, wobbly strings that suddenly open up and become real. And I just love the effect that it gives. And it was an unpopular move when I did that at first.
It's not safe.
It was not safe. It took a little while for them to understand what I was trying to do. I was trying to set something up and have it grow and expand. So when the real sounding strings come in, they have more impact.
What about the fine line of that? Because sometimes I imagine it's really cool and it works, and other times it's like a flute player in Metallica.
Yeah.
Not working. Not safe, and it's not working at all. So what is that fine line, and do you just play around and see what works?
Or you just try things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is that...
that's what I was talking about earlier when I talked about you breaking down like the tape decks and stuff. You're not afraid to mess things up. And if it works, great.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, you just go on to something else.
Yeah, one of the problems you see with bands, especially with young artists, is that they'll get in the studio and somebody will have an idea and inspiration will hit them. And they'll say, guys, what if we try this? And then what happens is everybody sits around on the couch and debates about whether or not it's going to work. Well, you don't know. It's only going to take a few minutes to try.
Right,
and at that point, everyone knows if it worked or if it didn't work.
Right.
So you're in the studio. You're there for this purpose. Try it. Give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, it didn't work.
We're going to play that track right now. This is Music Business Radio. The artist Among Savages, Start at the Beginning.
there's no proof of us ever quitting. Let us start at the beginning. There's a new sunrise for every sun setting. Let us start at the beginning. To save us from this path we're treading. Let us start at the beginning. Your life is waiting on you to be ready. Let us start at the beginning. You don't know love if you can't forgive. Let us start at the beginning. You'll never know me if you can't let me in. Your love is my love, my love is your love. Our love is growing, our love is going nowhere. Your love is my love, my love is your love. Our love is growing, our love is going nowhere. Your love is my love, my love is your love. Our love is let me live. Our love is going somewhere. Your love is my love, my love is your love. Our love is lonely. Our love is going somewhere. Let us start at the beginning.
Among Savages on Music Business Radio, start at the beginning. You know, when you say, hey, I'm going to put Bollywood horror and mix it with more contemporary music, it doesn't sound like it would work, but that works so well.
Yeah, I thought it was really pretty. There's something about the way that older recordings like that wobble and distort that is beautiful and haunting.
It's like AM radio. You know, driving down the road in the middle of the night. There's something kind of eerie about it, but it's cool. What are some other surprises you've had in the music business? Maybe a record that you thought was amazing that didn't work, or one that you thought was kind of a throwaway and it blew up?
Well, I'll tell you, that one we just listened to with Among Savages, I'm very proud of how that record turned out, the whole thing. And I was sort of surprised that I didn't really hear much about it after it came out, other than Peter's circle of friends really loved it. Nobody really paid much attention, and that bummed me out because I think it's a great record.
I think it's worth saying that so many times we have this artist versus business kind of mentality. It's like artists against everybody, but you're mixing the thing and you're putting your heart and soul into this sometimes as much or even more than an artist, it sounds like.
I would hope that I'm at least matching them in intensity because I really do care. I mean, it's hard work. Another record that I thought was going to do a lot more was Erin McCarley's first record. And talk about just killing ourselves. We were basically stuck in the studio for months trying to mix that and get it to where we were all happy. And I expected Pony to be a huge hit. A lot of people noticed it. I still get emails from people who discover that record and will just go online and find me and tell me how much they love it, which is great. But I thought it was going to blow up and be a huge record.
We had Erin on the show, and if you're interested in hearing that, it's at musicbusinessradio.com. Just search for Erin McCarley. Talk about a woman who had worked so hard to get there. And then when I found that the label had dropped her, I said, you got to be kidding. I mean, they had put so much effort into that. It's a funny business, and sometimes it just works
a lot of
that
effort
way.
and a lot of money, and she is still a fantastic artist.
Yeah, well, the good news is that in today's music industry, a major label is optional. You can still make music, and you can still distribute music.
No, and that I think a good example of that is Hanson. They own their own label, and man, those guys, they're out on the road killing it. They do very well.
They actually did a lot of work here in the building that we're recording this, and we're running out of time, but we're going to come back because I want to dive deep into Hanson. You've worked with them, and I want to talk about what it's like to work with these newer artists that people don't know, like Erin McCarley, but also an artist that's reinventing themselves from boy band to what they are now, Hanson. Craig Alvin is my guest today on Music Business Radio. He's worked with Amy Grant, Erin McCarley, and Hanson. We're going to talk more about Hanson when we come back on Music Business Radio.
Now I'm smoking into Texas with a hammer down and a rockin' little combo from the guitar town.
This is Emmylou Harris, and you're listening to Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the biz.
There's a half moon rising. Thursday, July 3rd, it's the annual Springer Mountain Farms Red, White, and Bluegrass Night at the Ryman with Yonder Mountain String Band.
Hoping that tomorrow will see us safely down the straight line.
Be a part of the audience as Yonder Mountain String Band makes their Ryman Auditorium headline debut.
No more time, I fear. All the time.
One of the top touring bluegrass acts in the country, Yonder Mountain String Band is redefining bluegrass music with a distinct renegade sound like no other.
I'd be 40 miles from Denver and trying to get back to that cool mountain.
Yonder Mountain String Band live at the Mother Church, Thursday, July 3rd. Tickets are only $27.50 and on sale now at Ryman.com or by calling 458-BLUE. Be a part of Springer Mountain Farms Bluegrass Nights at the Ryman.
I see it now. It's brighter when the lights are out.
Hey, this is Wild Cub, and you're listening to Music Business Radio. Want to know why we had to start our own record label? Because we want to actually make some money.
From Nashville, Tennessee, it's Music Business Radio, your backstage pass to the music business. I'm here with engineer, mixer, Craig Alvin, Casting Crowns, Phillips, Craig and Dean, Gunger, Erin McCarley, and Hanson, just a few of the artists that he's worked with. And I want to talk about Hanson because when they came to you, everybody knows Hanson from Bop.
Yes.
When those guys were like 9 years old or teenagers. They have matured since then, and you were working on one of the albums that's the more matured and refined Hanson.
Yeah. It's funny, actually, they had to recreate Bop because their contract, they have a re-record clause in their contract that said they couldn't re-record it for 10 years, but at the 10-year anniversary, they did, and they let me mix it. So I had to spend almost a week in the studio listening to Bop all by myself and trying to match it exactly to the original. And I'd say we got it about 98% there.
Okay, so how did that exactly work? Because I think the singer was 9 or something when he first did that. And 9 years later, 10 years later, 19 years old, voices change. And how close is that?
Well, what they did was they slowed it down and sang their old parts and then sped it back up.
It was like the Chipmunks used to do.
Exactly. They just had to work a lot to find like the exact speed at which it came back up, and it didn't sound fake. But it sounded like Taylor's, whatever he was, 11-year-old version of himself.
So working with an act like that, they've got to give a nod to where they were, but all artists want to progress. You don't want to just record the same album 30 times over.
Yeah.
So what is that experience like as opposed to somebody who's just got a blank slate, like they haven't had any success maybe that people would know about?
Well, I think with them, they're very sensitive to their fan base. They have a brand, and people know that there's a sound, and that sound is those three brothers doing harmonies the way that they've been doing them their whole lives. And I think the way that they have progressed is they've become much better at their instruments. They're very good players. And the subject matter of their songs has definitely become more adult. And they're not afraid to sing about things that aren't necessarily for preteen girls.
We talked about making the right versus the safe decision.
Yeah.
And I suppose the safe decision would be preteen girls, but the preteen girls are growing up too.
Yeah.
So
well, it's
an interesting predicament.
It is interesting because they still have those fans, a good portion of those fans that loved them when they were kids. And they have all grown up now, but they also have a lot of new fans that are still primarily young girls. But, it's funny, a lot of guys are starting to show up to the shows now, too, because really, when it comes down to it, they're kind of a rock and roll band, three brothers from Oklahoma, and they do kind of somewhere between a rock R&B sound, and they're really good at it. If you listen to the records, they're just a good band. If you can set aside Mbop. And
that was a great song, though.
It's a fantastic song.
Yeah.
I actually really think it's a great pop song. But if you set that aside and just listen to them as a band, they're doing stuff that's really excellent.
What is it like working with a family band compared to just 3 or 4 guys just off the street? Is there a difference? Because we've all heard the recordings of the Beach Boys.
Sure.
And we've all known about the Van Halen brothers fighting or Oasis.
Yeah.
We hear these stories. Did those guys get along pretty well? What did you learn about band dynamics from them?
They do get along well. They have that thing where they're brothers and they communicate like brothers communicate. I think it's interesting. There's another band that comes from Oklahoma that are brothers, and they're called Aranda, and I've done a couple records with them. So I've got Hanson and Aranda. I'm waiting for the Kings of Leon to call me so that I can have all 3 brother bands from Oklahoma.
That'd be a nice call.
It would be. I doubt it's going to happen.
Give me some more stories about a great band that you worked with, something that happened that surprised you.
One thing that happened that surprised me was the first Gungor record that I worked on. I just mixed that record. They sent it to me, and I didn't really know these guys. They just contacted me and asked me to mix. I got it, and the recording quality was not the best. It was very difficult for me to get that record sounding good. It was a record called Beautiful Things. And I was working hard to make it sound great, but I was fighting the tracks the whole time. And you add to that, Michael Gungor basically leads the band, and he's very picky. When I got done, I thought, this record is going to go nowhere. I was so affected emotionally by the battle that I was fighting. I didn't realize that we were making a really good record. So you can imagine how shocked I was the day that the Grammy nominations came out, and I looked at the list and realized that they were on there, I think, 3 times. I thought that it was a record that no one was ever going to hear, and it turned out to be a total career-making record for them. And Michael and I arm wrestled so much during the mixing of that record that I thought he didn't really like me. And so I was totally shocked when I got called to work on the next record, and then also the record after that, but we're actually good friends now. But that first one was such a battle that I didn't see it doing anything.
What about that? Because you're working on a mix and you present it to somebody, the label, the artist. Talk about rejection and talk about how you deal with. On one hand, you've got to be attached to this stuff and you've got to go for it. But on the other hand, you're giving away that baby and somebody's calling it ugly, and you've got to be cool with that.
Yeah. Again, this is a weird job because I'm taking all these other artists' art and then I'm reinterpreting it and presenting it. It's a weird thing to do that. And so I realized that they're feeling very vulnerable. Like they're sort of at my mercy. So I try and be accommodating, but I also try and push. Like it is my job to push and to try and find something that is unique and original in what they're doing and feature it. And that makes people nervous sometimes. So there are definitely times when I'll push back. And then there are times when I realize it's not going to do anyone any good if I push back, because they're just going to be unhappy. Ultimately, it's not my record. It's not my name on the cover. When you guys play it on the radio, you aren't going to mention me. You're going to mention the artist. And, I realize that that's the position I'm in. So, I'll try to do things that are interesting. But if you don't want me to, I'm not going to force you to accept that.
On that note, the fact that there are a lot of people that have to do with a record other than the artist, that's one of the reasons we have this show, because I don't know that the general public has any idea that sometimes the artists don't write their songs, or sometimes, obviously, artists aren't mixing their stuff. Yet some do. Some do. And that's going to be my next question. What about these jack-of-all-trades guys that, they mix it, they produce it, they record it?
Well, it works for some people. Matt Mahaffey has done a really good job of that. I've always enjoyed his work. If we're going to talk about music business, in a town like Nashville, somebody gave me some great advice when I showed up, because I was someone who was doing all kinds of things. I was involved with production, engineering, editing, mixing, and someone told me, pick one. And then when people ask you what you do, say that one thing with confidence so they'll believe you. And I did that. I said, I basically looked at all the things that I do, and I looked at the equipment that I had and the setup that I had, and it was the one thing that made sense, was mixing. And so when people would ask me what I do, I would say I'm a mix engineer, and I have a studio over at Marathon Village, and I just mixed Erin McCarley's record, because that was the first record I mixed when I got to town. And it was kind of a golden setup for me, because there was a lot of buzz going on about her at the time. And I was able to kind of turn that into a mix career. Of course, I had to be able to do it. I had to know how to mix to actually pull that off. But I know there's one guy in particular I'm thinking of that's a musician and arranger, and he also produces and he writes and he plays in a band or two, and he also has a studio where he mixes. And you ask him what he does, and he gives you this long, wandering list, and nothing sticks. For that reason, I believe he struggles quite a bit.
There's another reason, I think, from, aside from the technical aspect, is the creative aspect. If you bring in another producer, it's another person to hear the record, another person to bring in those opinions, like we talked about the Bollywood strings. And I think that's really, really valuable.
It can be, if the relationship is good. A relationship doesn't have to be good for it to be good for the music. I'll say that. There are definitely, I've been in some situations where artist and producer don't get along, but they also make really crappy music without each other. And that's one of the weird things about art, is it's chemistry.
And sometimes that tension can fuel that art.
Yeah. But we all have this natural desire to resolve tension. I get bummed out, like, whenever a band tells me, we fired our drummer or something like that. If it's a band that I love, I'm always like, but what if you put someone else in there and we don't have the chemistry? Yeah. It's the same thing with, Sammy Hagar and Van Halen, Yeah. I'm sure that David Lee Roth was impossible to be around, but it's not Van Halen without him.
Absolutely. And there's something about, we see those guys that they'll fire the original drummer and just get like a session drummer.
Yeah.
A touring drummer. It's like, he's not even part of the band. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the thing that, if there was one thing I would love to see more artists do, it's embrace the tension and make those unsafe decisions and just be an artist. Stop trying to play it safe and just make a statement. How refreshing would that be, right?
Yeah, or, be willing to live with imperfection. It's way more interesting. Oh my gosh, perfection is so boring.
Great way to end the show. Let's talk about perfection.
Yeah.
I want to talk about auto-tuning. I want to talk about quantizing drum beats and all the studio trickery that we use to make a record now. Is that helping or hurting?
It's both. There's nothing wrong with... we've been doing this since the beginning of making records. We've been figuring out ways to tune vocals. Even if it's just like, you messed up, do it again. That's still a method of tuning vocals. And we've had several technological advancements along the way. I mean, even at Motown, they had a special tape deck that was a variable speed rotating head tape deck that they would run the vocals onto and then delay it. And they knew that if they varied the speed and the rotation of the head, that they could then alter the pitch of the vocal, and they would tune vocals that way. So this isn't new. Editing drums, we used to do it with razor blades, but now we can just do it with a mouse. It's not wrong to do that stuff, and some styles of music require it. So, we don't want to eliminate our creative possibilities. However, there is something to be said for having a bunch of guys walk into a room, have them play a song, and just feel it. And just being okay to live with the fact that it's not perfect. I had a producer I was working with several years ago, but they flew me out from Portland here to Nashville to work on a record. They brought me out specifically because I do analog recording, and they didn't have anyone that they felt comfortable with, doing that. So I was running the tape deck, and the producer was sitting next to me, and we were listening to the playback on the first song, and he looked very concerned, and I thought he didn't like it. I knew it sounded great. And so I turned to him, and I'm like, man, what's wrong? You okay? And he's like, well, I don't know. I mean, usually I can just go in and look and see if everything's on the grid, and then I know we have a good take. But with tape, I can't do that. And it blew my mind that here is this guy who is actually he's a great artist in his own right, and really a fantastic player and writer, and has all kinds of awards. But when it was coming off from tape, he was so accustomed to watching waveforms go by that he had to readjust.
Yeah, he's watching, not listening.
Yeah.
Wild, man.
Yeah.
Craig, where can people get in touch with you?
You can reach me through my management, Brickwall Management, or you can just get a hold of me directly on Facebook. It's just, Craig Alvin, or you can email me at craigalvin@gmail.com.
Well, appreciate you being here. We got to have you come back. We're going to play some more music, more so. We didn't even get to 10% of this music you brought in, man. And I know we got some A-B work tapes. We're going to have you back, Craig. I appreciate you being here. Craig Alvin, Music Business Radio. Thanks for being here. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more from Erin McCarley, again, musicbusinessradio.com is where to find her and other shows. I'll see you next week when I'll interview another industry guest.
Thanks for listening to Music Business Radio, a production of Tuned In Broadcasting Incorporated, Nashville, Tennessee. Recorded in the WRLT Lightning 100 studios. Music Business Radio is produced by Gary Crane, David Hooper, and Dan Buckley. Special technical assistance by Tom Hanson. With Pro Tools post-production by Justin Hamill and Dan Buckley. And Lester, walk the dogs. All three of them. For information on syndication, guest booking, demo derby music, or downloading previous episodes, visit musicbusinessradio.com.
Music Business Radio.